like to welcome everybody to the first annual podcast battle royale. Referee Steve. In this corner, weighing 189 pounds, we have Open Apple with Ken Gagne. And in this corner, weighing in at 198 pounds,
I don't think so.
we have Retro Roundtable with David Greelish, Carrington Vanston, and Earl Evans. Fellas, I want a good clean fight, no blows below the belt. In the event of a knockdown, I want you to go to the opposite corner and await instruction from the referee. Let's have a good fight.
Thank you all for coming to this, the podcast Royale Battle Royale, for a chance for these podcasting veterans here to tell us about what they do. Let me just give a quick introduction. We have Earl Evans, I think, who's been doing this the longest, since 2005. 2005, he started the Retrobits podcast. Carrington started his 1 megahertz back in, I think, 2006. And then David has done various kinds of things, but I don't think he had anything regular until the Retro Computing Roundtable came up.
Right.
And then we have Ken Gagne, who's been doing this since February 2011 with the Open Apple podcast. So why don't you guys, maybe in that order, kind of tell us about your podcasting history and what made you decide to get started.
Well, in the year 2000, I had decided to get into the retro computing hobby. And I was interested in a number of podcasts that I was listening to at the time. And actually, this is, fast forward to about 2005 when podcasting was really starting to get rolling. And I decided, hey, why not a retro computing podcast? There seems to be quite a bit of interest in the hobby. And podcasting, it has a low barrier to entry. So I got a book on how to do podcasts correctly and tried to adopt some good habits from the very beginning and set out doing the Retrobits podcast. I was, of course, nervous that either I wasn't going to like it or it was going to be too hard to produce, but it actually turned out to be fairly easy and fairly enjoyable. So been kind of doing it on and off ever since. For a few years I was steady on once a week, but then life gets in the way. So it's been a little erratic since then, but then joined in with David on the Retro Computing Roundtable, and that's been a regular show, regular schedule. And that's been enjoyable so far too. So that's kind of my podcasting story.
By the way, real quick, how many people here do not listen to any podcasts? Okay. I wondered about that, Mike. Okay, and so I want to talk to Carrington next.
I started first with a podcast called The Monster Feed Variety Show in 2005, a short sketch comedy show, which actually got me my writing gig on the BBC, which I still do, which is cool. And then I started doing that was a short run, that was less than a year. And then I did 5 Things You Didn't Know That You Didn't Know, which was even, sure, that was like a 1-minute podcast that I did. And then in 2006, I started on 1 megahertz as a way really just to document I was playing around with Apple II stuff, and there didn't seem to be anything like that on the net, podcast-wise, so I thought I'd just start sort of reviewing games, or I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it. And that has been kind of sporadic. I mean, I put out an episode yesterday, the day before, or whatever, but it's been a year between episodes, so, but it should be back bi-weekly now. And then a year or so ago, David approached us with the idea of doing Retro Computing Roundtable because he knew he couldn't possibly do it without Earl and I. We hold that ship together. And in the last year, I've also been doing one called DoubleTake, which is a movie review podcast that comes out every week as well with my friend Sharon. So weird sort of variety pack of podcasts, and just love doing it.
And David.
So I got an iPod, I guess, in like 2004, because I actually was an Apple solutions consultant at a CompUSA, I was an Apple rep. And I wasn't, I love music, but I wasn't really excited about iPod. So, but I worked for Apple and decided to get one. And then, learning more, I needed to know about it. But then I discovered podcasts. And I already liked audiobooks, so this is like a natural thing. The first one I discovered was Mac-related, was the MacCast. And then I thought, wow, maybe there's some type of retro computing type of podcast. So then I discovered Earl's podcast, and oh, right, this is awesome. And so I had that listened to, then discovered his podcast, and then I started thinking, you know, based on stuff I used to do, that maybe this would be a vehicle for me to do what I used to do, but first do you know, audio medium. And so I messed around and did a few audio episodes. I think 2007, somewhere when I got started. So I did one called Classic Computing, did 3 of those, and they're okay, but just wasn't good at it by myself. And then I did this D&D. I'm still doing it, I just haven't done one in a while. And you know, it's a copyrighted book, so I wrote him, and his publisher got permission. It's one of my favorite.
Is it so much easier to co-host?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So you know, so that I still want to get that done, and I got permission to do the book, and it's my favorite computer history book. So jumping forward, then I had the idea. So then the Retro Maccast came out. So I'm a fan of podcasts, and so I've listened to all the retro computing ones. And I definitely thought I mean, these guys are great, or are great at it by themselves. But for me, I felt like having a co-host or interacting with someone would be the easiest thing. So I had the idea for the Retro Computing Roundtable. And so at first, so they both were on the first show. But then my idea was to rotate people around. And anyway, cut the story short, ultimately.
You could do that.
Well,
that's too much.
Yeah, I just felt it would be a better show and easier on me and stuff to have a regular panel. We always did 4 people. I thought 3 was better, and they both are great. And then, yeah, I had podcasting experience too, so then they became regular co-hosts. We're equally billed.
Starting in 2008, for a year and a half, I was producing a weekly podcast at my workplace, Computer World Magazine. I did the voiceovers at the beginning and the end, chose the music, and then did all the editing of the content, which the editor-in-chief created. That was my first exposure to producing podcasts. I was listening to podcasts for a while, including each of these gentlemen's and A2 Unplugged and several others. But there were 3 podcasts in particular that inspired me with their variety and the quality of both the production and the content, those being the TrekCast, which I found out about after a Kansas City resident, Dayton Ward, appeared on it and promoted it on his blog. There was the Major Nelson Xbox podcast, which I still listen to, and the Retro Maccast. All very different shows, very different topics and formats, but each one had something I really liked. And at KansasFest 2010, you know, I was up late one night talking to people, and I started wondering, why can't we have conversations like this year-round? So I started thinking maybe we can have a podcast. And my original thought was, let's just get some guys together, just talk about Apple II stuff for 4 hours, and then cut it up into 4 monthly episodes. And that way we don't have to record every month, we'll just put out this stuff that's evergreen, that's timeless. And that format dramatically evolved, as you know, as Mike and I started talking more about it. And eventually we started with the idea in August 2010, and 6 months later, the podcasting scene was very different. A2 Unplugged had stopped podcasting. Retro Computing Roundtable was invented, and Mike and I were starting to get concerned, is there even room for us in this environment anymore? We decided, it doesn't matter, we're going to do it anyway. I took all of that experience and 2 months ago launched another podcast. It's a weekly show. I'm the only host, and I am interviewing people with multiple sclerosis about the challenges that they face and how they've overcome them. It's only going to run through September, and again, it's very different from Open Apple, but using all the skills I learned in Open Apple, I'm basically able to hit the ground running and not have this learning curve of what hardware do I use, how do I edit it, etc. So it's been really fun, and it's a very succinct show compared to the retro computing shows that we listen to.
Yeah, that was just almost always about 30 minutes.
I've never had it run over 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And if it starts to run over 30, I edit it down until it's under 30.
Okay. I was wondering, do any of you have any way with the sites that your podcasts are hosted on? I mean, they all run through iTunes Music Store, so you can get them there. But do you have any idea what the sites that you're hosting? Any guesses what your listenership is?
I have a guess.
What's your guess?
It's about 1,500 listeners per episode, and the aggregate total of downloads throughout the history of the show is somewhere creeping up on 700,000.
Wow. Wow. And you've got, I think, over 140
About
episodes
140
total.
episodes.
Yeah.
And the podcast hosting site that I use, called Libsyn, Liberated Syndication, gives you very good statistics about your podcast. So that's how come I'm able to take a look at those numbers on a regular basis.
I didn't realize until I talked with him, but the gentleman that did the Today on iOS talk part of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, iTunes does not provide analytics at all.
No, nothing. What about Carrington, David, any guesses?
I don't know how many current, I just topped 2,000 downloads of the episode that just came out. So that seems to be the number of people that stayed subscribed over a year of dull time. It's typically around 5,000 downloads before the peak, like when episode 14 came out, when it was more regular.
Okay.
It's half that for DoubleTake. We have, I think, 1,800 subscribers according to the host, like Ed, so it gets about 2,500 or 3,000 downloads. But a lot of people download these multiple times, that kind of stuff. So your number of subscribers is usually fewer than your number of downloads. So we typically hover around 1,800 downloads right now on the last few episodes of DoubleTake. And RCR has a much lower audience. I think we have, 500 or something like that subscribers. So I think it's getting like 800 downloads or something.
We did change servers recently.
Right.
So
yeah, so everything's sort of messed up stat-wise and stuff. So the last time I looked, I think it was saying 500 or 580 subscribers and maybe twice that in downloads or something. So.
And as for me, so speaking about my own podcast in the earlier, so pre-changing the server for the RCR, the good news is that I was not impaired at all by not knowing anything about RSS feeds or, because I don't know any of this technical stuff as far as that goes. So I have to give Apple credit with iLife and MobileMe and all that made it very easy for me to do what I did. But unfortunately it went away. And so, you know, we moved RCR ahead of time. I only recently got the Stampede, the classic computing ones moved. So I have no idea as far as what they got before that. There's no way to know.
Because it kind of doesn't matter.
Well, yeah. Ken, do you have any guesses on Open Apple? I'm sure your listenership is.
Yeah, we host our content ourselves. We don't use Libsyn or site readers or anything, but we do use a media redirection service called Blueberry. They also created the podcasting plugin for WordPress that we use. And this says that overall we have about 20,000 downloads of all our episodes aggregate, and per episode is around 800.
Now, do any of you have, like I can speak with Earl, maybe since you've done it the longest, do you know how long it took to build up to this volume that you get about now when you put out a new episode? I mean, clearly you didn't start the first episode, 8,000 people said, oh, I want to listen to that, so.
I think about a couple of years,
Okay.
actually, maybe even more, because one of the things that I was negligent on, I didn't do any advertising to speak of. I published on a couple of mailing lists that were retro computing oriented and got on a couple of forums, but didn't really tell anyone about the show. It just kind of spread through word of mouth. And so that takes a while to snowball.
Is there any advertising, any way of, I mean, it's almost like the internet in general, that to get, if you want to say something, you have to say it frequently enough or loud enough for it to raise above the noise. Is there any way of kind of getting that message out there? Hey, we got something to say about retro computing.
Lots of podcast aggregate sites and things. I guess you could. I've never advertised either. Like our shows are niche enough that you figure your audience is going to find you. Like DoubleTake's different because it's a movie review site. There's a million podcasts like that. So maybe I should advertise that one. But 1 megahertz or RCR or Open Apple, we're so targeted.
Yeah.
Like everybody searches for it. There's not a lot of them. It's easy to find them on iTunes and stuff. So I've always just assumed put out content and people eventually find it.
I think they have to sort of know, you know, not everybody's seeking audio entertainment either. So, but if they are, they can certainly find, I think, our niche. But
well, and you wonder if Apple's broken out podcasting, at least in the iOS, to a separate app, if that's also going to help or not help the whole discovery aspect of it.
I think it'd be great.
They have broken it, but I don't. Yeah, I don't. I can't anticipate how that'll play out. Whether they're doing it because they want to start to disassociate themselves from it, or if they're like, I don't know. But people who are interested, it's easy enough to find on iTunes. That's where almost everybody finds their podcast. You go in there, you search for a topic, you listen. Hopefully you have good cover art, and people just give you a shot.
Back in the days before iTunes was really the big gorilla, there were other podcast engines or podcast search registry sites. Yeah, that you could register for, and I did register for some of those. But once iTunes really kicked in and had the lion's share, then it was easy. You just register there and pretty much anyone could find you.
One of those directories, I think it might have been Podbean, I submitted OpenApple and I put the URL and the title and the description. I don't know if it was some sort of a bug, I have to assume it was intentional, but no matter what field I was filling out in their submission form, it would filter out the word Apple. So the name of the podcast was Open. The website was open-.net. And I don't know why that was happening. Maybe it was like a bad word filter or what. So I emailed them, and they're like, oops, we fixed it. All right.
You've done blogging for quite a while. Do you see a connection in terms of blogging versus podcasting? I mean, obviously one's audio, one's visual, but what about the comparisons?
Well, certainly, they're consumed very different ways. Podcasting is something you can listen to while you're driving to work, while you're going for a jog. It's something that you can have on in the background, whereas written content requires your eyes and thus more focus. It's harder to multitask. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing that multiple sclerosis podcast, so people can be training for an MS fundraiser and listening to the podcast. And also, I used to run an MS blog that had a dozen different authors, and getting people to write stories was really hard, especially people who aren't normally writers. But I can sit down and talk to them for 20 minutes, and anybody will talk to them, and I can record that and publish it. So it's much easier to get a lot more voices, not literally speaking, into a podcast than it is into a blog. But yeah, they are very different. But in both cases, you have to think about SEO, and that's one of the reasons we have such extensive show notes in our because Google doesn't index audio content. And so if you're looking for an interview with Bob Tripp and you have one in your podcast, you have to say that in your show notes, whether it's in the title or somewhere else. And that's why almost every topic we mention on the show gets a written reference. And we would like to have written transcripts of our shows, but those are extremely time-consuming or expensive.
Can you use like Dragon Natural Speaking?
Unfortunately, since we have different voices on every episode, Dragon Natural Speaking is not trained to recognize all those voices, especially when we're speaking over each other.
And you still have to go through and edit the final thing to make sure that it actually got what you thought you said. Especially as a doctor who's tried using it for dictating, you got to go back and look at it again, or you'll be very embarrassed.
I do like no show notes. I'm terrible. Like whatever. Let's listen to it's about this. Let's do it.
And speaking of online submission of content, we are using Backchat for this session too. So if you have any questions.
I just want to comment, I'm kind of surprised. I mean, podcasts and audio, like audiobooks too, are a huge part of my life. So, I mean, that triggered that whole thing for, about 5 years now or so.
That's your trigger? I'll remember that.
Well, catalyst then, or whatever, I don't know. But, I think, audiobooks are pretty popular, pretty big. Audible's pretty,
They sponsor every podcast in the world except us.
So I don't know what the disconnect is. And then podcasts are free, so I don't understand. I would have thought it would have been bigger by now, or maybe it really is. And I don't know.
We're doing a retro computing podcast. The audience is only so large.
But I think you still have the issue as far as that's concerned. That, I mean, the whole problem with the internet in general is it's everything.
Yeah.
And you've got to either have a well-known name like CNN.com for people to even know that you're there, or you've got to have some topic that everybody wants to know now about, that they're going to be searching for it. And it's, again, you have to rise above the noise.
But at the same time, I look at it like, who cares? I mean, it's not, I wouldn't want to do it if nobody listened. But I put out a stupid blathering thing 2 days ago talking about playing Archon, and a couple thousand people listened to it. Like, that's more audience than something like that in a lot of ways would even deserve to have. Like, that's crazy. So whether it's 1,000 people or 30,000 people, it doesn't really affect. Like, you're talking and somebody listens. And
but I still marvel at how you have collected such a large audience, other than the fact that you've been doing this longest, or longer than most of us.
It helped though, because I kept I used to do a webcomic called Movie Punks, and had a crazy, massive, I don't understand it audience. And I got into podcasting not too long after I got out of webcomics. And a lot of people just jumped ship. So I already had an audience, and I think I just kept, because people said, okay, I'll listen to your Apple, and then I think a lot of people said that topic isn't mine. But it really jump-started, so right away, first episode, 10,000 downloads. It was crazy.
Because for every episode of Open Apple, we publish a link to it on A2 Central, Call Apple, CSA2, Apple Fritter, Vintage Computer Forum, Twitter, Facebook, and Google+.
So much more professional than me. I don't do any of that.
Exactly. I've never seen you promote your show anywhere. People just click refresh in iTunes and they're like, oh my God, he's back.
I just don't, I'm too lazy. Like I should do that stuff. Like that's a better way to run a podcast. Like everybody, like, and honest, the big thing I have found though, like I went a year between 1 megahertz because it's just me. Whereas I do DoubleTake every week because I don't want to let down Sherry. And every 3 weeks we do it because I don't want to let down these guys. Like having a co-host is the magic gold of actually getting stuff out because you have somebody else who you don't want to let down. When it's just me, I'm like, yeah, I'll do it in August. Like I'll do whatever.
And that was pretty much the selling point of, I mean, for me, that was what I wanted for myself, and it was kind of a selling point to them. Like, why don't you guys consider being a co-host on the show full time? Because then it gives us all a vehicle that we can do, you know.
It takes all
we
the
all like
pressure
doing
off.
it, so then we do it all the
You
time.
don't have to do everything yourself then either. I don't have to worry about showing up and having a whole shows or really
Yeah.
any idea at all. I count on you guys showing up and bringing an element show. And so
Doesn't
it's
show at all.
but it's easier because we have a shared. Maybe we should talk about production stuff or how we do it or whatever.
Well, that's one of the questions along the way here.
So I'm really interested to hear
I
how
think
you
maybe
do
had
it.
a
Before
question.
you get off numbers though,
Yes.
I do want to say that when Retrobits started, I told my wife I'd be happy if 5 to 7 people listened on a regular basis. And I was not being facetious. I mean, perhaps I was underestimating a little bit, but I really did mean that, you know, I didn't have any idea how big the retro computing podcast community would be. I thought that it could be double digits, and that was okay. And even today, it would still be okay.
Yeah. A listenership the size of this room would make me delighted and happy. I'm like,
Absolutely.
whatever, dude.
It
somebody's listening to what you
does
say.
bring to my mind something I remember reading on John Gruber's Daring Fireball blog once, is that he had something where somebody said, if you want to be successful as a blogger, and podcasting and blogging seem similar to me other than the context in which they're given, he says, talk about stuff that you're interested in and don't worry about whether people are listening or not, and others who have the same interest will find you. I mean, sure, there's advertising, there's putting out the stuff so people can search for you and find it, but I can't tell you how many times I listen to Retro Maccast. And someone says, oh wow, I just found your episodes and I'm listening through them, or Retrobits. And I'm listening through all the Retrobits now that I found it. So if you have enough out there that they can find it, they're going to say, amazing stuff, I wanted this, and they're going to add to your audience right there. Well, how about setup for the podcast, and how are they different for the solo versus the group efforts? Maybe Ken, want to start with that this time?
Sure. Mike and I have a Google Doc spreadsheet, and throughout the month leading up to each episode, we are putting notes in there, such as there's a topic that we want to discuss, a link to the topic. Sometimes while we're doing the show, we'll pull up the link so we know what we're talking about because we have it in front of us, and then we'll include that in the show notes during post-production. And we're just putting everything together. Mike and I also reach out to different guests that we want to have on the show and try to recruit them. We haven't had anybody say no, but there are always scheduling conflicts. So there have been some people we've tried to get on the show and either had to wait a couple months to get them on or it just hasn't worked out yet. And then we set up a date and time, usually on a Friday night or sometime anytime on a Saturday. Mike and I are usually 2 hours apart in time zones. We've had people in all 4 of the continental United States time zones, as well as in France or Australia. Sometimes we have to record really early or really late. There have been times when I'm in the studio at midnight and the bloopers are just ridiculous because I have no idea what I'm talking about. But is this what you mean by preparation as opposed to
Well, and that is the setup, and what's different about doing that, the group one versus the solo one?
the solo show? The crux of each episode is a 20-minute interview, and there's like 5 minutes of stuff at the beginning and end of each. So last April, I was driving down to Providence, Rhode Island to interview somebody. I pulled up a map of people affiliated with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society that lived between me and Providence, and I found 3 and 4 others. So I emailed them all and said, hey, can I stop by your house and interview you too? They said, sure. So I went home that day with about 5 interviews, each of them 20 minutes long. And I sat down in an afternoon and cleaned them all up and edited them. Then the 5 minutes before and after, those I record each week. I get somebody from the MS Society, an employee, on the phone, and I ask her, so what's new this week? What's going on at the organization? And she tells me, and then I record for 5 minutes by myself to introduce the show, and then I concatenate those with the interview I recorded sometimes months ago and push it out. So the interview, there's an episode that just came out this past Monday that I recorded the interview a month ago. The extra 5 minutes at the beginning and end, and then putting it all together, creating an MP3, uploading it to me into iTunes, whatever, that takes maybe an extra hour a week. But it's a very fast show. It's very easy to do it in advance. And, yeah, I mean, there's only going to be 18 episodes total, and I recorded I recorded 8 in April, 8 in June, and I'll do 2 next month, and then we're done.
And then your physical setup of hardware that you're using, is it your own, or is it the stuff you're using in Computer World?
I use the same setup for both shows. Computer World, which is the magazine I work for, has its own audio recording studio that they let me use as long as I'm not supposed to be doing my job and somebody else doesn't have a work-related use for the studio at that time, which is why I'm usually there nights and weekends. It's a very extensive and expensive setup that I could never afford on my own. I don't know what most of the buttons do, but the quality's pretty good. I was recording using the PC that's hooked up to all this hardware, but then I realized that I could just take a line-in jack right from the stereo to my laptop and record there. So instead of using Sony SoundForge and then exporting it to Audacity, I just can record directly in Audacity. And we conduct the interviews over Skype. Mike and I are on Skype with a third person every month. And we have each person, I'm not recording the Skype conversation, because if I did, I would end up with one aggregate audio track that has all 3 of us talking. Instead, each person is recording his local audio, so they end up with an MP3 of just a third of the conversation, basically. And then they send all that to me, and I edit it together so that I have 3 separate audio tracks. That way, if Mike is talking and I sneeze while he's talking, I can delete the sneeze without affecting what he's saying. And different people have different background noises too, so I can do a separate noise filters on each one. I can balance the sound on each one. Sometimes something goes awry because when 3 people are recording their audio, you got 3 points of failure. We had one person on the show. He had never used Audacity before. He recorded with us for 2 hours, clicked stop recording, went to close the file. I said, do you want to save the changes? He said, no. And the file disappeared. He didn't understand what it meant by save the changes. It should have said, do you want to save the file or do you want to save the recording, in which case he would have clicked yes. But that's why I am recording the Skype conversation on my end as a backup. So in that case, I did have an audio track that was our guest and Mike combined. So I had 3 tracks, Ken, Mike, and guest. So when just Mike was talking, I had that nice and clear, but when the guest was talking and Mike would sneeze, nothing I can do about it. Mike. Any question?
Yes. Have you had Audacity crash on people?
I've not had Audacity crash during recording. I've had Audacity do some really strange things while editing. Even in this very last episode, I created an entire draft of the final MP3 sent to Mike to listen to. He found some errors I had made. I went back to correct them, and when I opened the file in Audacity, I was missing. Mike and our guest were there, and I was not.
Does it?
So I had to make the changes to the MP3 I sent Mike, and then re-encode all that. So that actually did impact the quality of what you finally heard in the July episode.
I'm trying to get also, if it crashes during the record, does that mean everything's lost before that? Because I noticed the way Audacity seems to save snippets of files constantly.
I've never had that happen.
We haven't run into that, so you don't know yet.
Not neither the host nor any of the guests have ever had Audacity crash during recording.
Let's talk next about their setup and how they do it versus solo versus group.
Why don't you go ahead, Earl?
Sure.
Retrobits, I guess.
Sure. Well, on the solo side, I typically use, I got this set up when I started. It's kind of a middle-of-the-road microphone and a little mixer box and analog plug-in to the PC. That was the hardware that I would use to record. In terms of software, it's on a PC, and it's kind of this weird, out there product called Samplitude Music Studio. but I've had it from the past when I did some music recording, and it seemed like it would be a good fit for podcast recording. It's a typical multi-track. You can record one thing and then record another thing while you're listening to the first thing. And that. So that's my studio that I use, and I have trouble sometimes with my P's and S's, too much popping. So someone told me I should get a pop filter. And it's just this little screen that sits in front of your microphone, and I think that improved things dramatically. You know, spent $10, $15 on this little accessory. In terms of show prep, for the Retrobits show, it often involves a lot of prep because I'm talking about some particular computer model or some particular computing language. So I try and do a lot of research before I get up in front of the microphone. I look at the forums and enthusiast blogs for whatever that particular subject matter is, so that I don't say wrong things when I'm doing the podcast. That contrasted to Retro Computing Roundtable, I tend not to use that fancier setup. I just use my normal Skype Logitech headset, and we have a show document on Google Docs that we use to collaborate. So we'll throw some items in there. Often the show prep for me, for Retro Computing Roundtable, can be as short as a half hour to an hour.
I try to prep
So,
while he's doing the intro.
and so I'd say, you know, the differences are slight difference in the equipment that I use. We record off of Skype, and unlike Ken's process here, which is pretty professional by comparison, we get on Skype and we just record the three of us. We just go for it. And we don't separate the tracks. And, you know, perhaps we do have a little bit of background noise, especially with Carrington. But we found that that works for us. So differences for Retro Computing Roundtable, less prep, slightly different equipment, but definitely a more regular show, because again, because of the three of us, you don't feel like it's all on your shoulders.
Right.
But, I mean, you were very regular for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, but everything, computers sort of slow down, come to an end, so.
There is this.
I think you should give yourself more credit.
Podcast fade.
Yeah.
After a
Pod
while.
fade,
Sure.
yes.
Yeah, they just can't, I'm gonna take a break.
Yeah,
and
because
it
for
gets
the longest
longer.
time, man, you were like, stuff, so you should feel proud of that.
So that's my prep.
Now, what about
questions?
the, and I didn't ask Ken about this, that you've got, everybody has like an intro song, an outro song, and sometimes these little things in the middle of bumpers or something. Is that something that you just record the whole thing and then you add it afterwards, or how do you do that?
Well, for the intro, I try to match the words of the intro along with the song. So I'm having to actually listen to the song through the headphones while I'm talking, so I get things in the right spot. The outro, I actually add that after the fact, and have the little fade out and that. In terms of finding the song, I was very interested in Creative Commons, in this concept of like open source media, if you will. So when I went to start Retrobits, I wanted to find a song that I knew that I could use freely. So I went out to the different venues for, and the interesting thing about that is I found that there's a lot of great music out there too that you can have for free out on the Creative Commons sites. And I don't have bumpers, and I've often wondered about that, whether or not I should break up the show a little bit in between, because if it's just, yes, I do have a bumper here.
I've got bumpers.
But if it's 45 minutes of talking and you don't have anything in between, I wondered if that kind of gets monotonous. So I've liked with Retro Computing Roundtable that David throws in, you know, the little retro computer ads.
Yeah, we added that a little bit later, but yeah.
But I suppose the way you were doing your show, if you have a topic like you're talking about in Fortran, it's like you don't want to necessarily break it up and say, now a message from our bumper. You
Yeah, I
just
think-
keep talking.
No, that's true, but Retrobits, one of the things that I learned from that book that I talked about when I started podcasting is don't think that you're going to get everything right from the beginning, and maybe don't think you're ever going to get everything right, but try to get as much as you can. And one of the things they said is have a predictable format. So when people listen to the show, they know what's coming and about when it's coming, and it breeds a familiarity. So with Retrobits, there's the email and forum section, then the news and links, and then the main topic.
And that's what
And so, and in between those would be an
Yeah, that'd
opportunity
be
for.
really good.
Yeah.
And when you start, that you're reading over the music, do you actually read it off the script, or do you just know it so well that you don't remember it?
The beginning part I have memorized by heart now, but the rest of the show, I produce a script.
You do?
I do, and sometimes it depends on, you know, the mood I'm in. Either it will be bullet points and I just wing it, or sometimes it's nearly verbatim, but I do have something in front of me so that, yeah, it's keeping me honest.
Okay.
I was just going to say, because you know, having been, so I was, you know, their fan before we were on the show together, but seeing both of your shows, the nature of your shows, I think it works very well, not having bumper music stuff in between. You know, I liked it; it was great. And but like when Retro Madcast came along, you know, I liked that they had their little music in between. You know, so it's cool both ways, depending on the nature of the show. And we could probably have it either way on the RCR, but I like it. You know, yeah, I think it's great putting the commercials kind of breaks it up,
Yeah.
but I think it's okay if you don't have that too. I don't know. I guess when you move into professional television, or so I think all that bumper stuff is based on commercial. Like
Well, it
every
also
time they run a
kind of-
commercial now and come back from
It also
commercial.
kind of breaks up the
Yeah.
thing a little bit, so you know, we're moving from A to B and from B to C. So that you've got something to, and depending on, and I suppose this also has to do with what you're using to produce this with. I know that some of the people who out there use GarageBand to make what they do, and then they get, you know, the Retro Madcast, they stuff pictures in at various places,
Yeah.
and, you know, so that, there's a lot of things you can do with
And their
podcasts
music is
if you
from
want.
GarageBand, and the Stan Beat and the original Classic Computing one I did, that's all from GarageBand. And you guys got your music independently, and then the RCR, that music.
GarageBand.
Is yours from GarageBand?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
DoubleTake is from GarageBand.
Yeah.
Just changed in tone from the
One
samples
Megahertz
come
is
with
in
it.
GarageBand.
1 megahertz is,
Is it?
but it's a mix of some sample things that were in GarageBand, and then you can also write your own notes.
Yeah.
So I just put your own notes and you pick an instrument and bingo, and then just, that's my theme tune.
Ken, where
just
do you
for
get your
fun.
music?
Mostly ocremix.org, which is, it's not exactly chiptune music, because you can use any instrument you want, but all the music is based on old video game music. So it's all remixes, and it's the name, Overclock Remix. Or freemusicarchive.org.
Okay.
And one of the songs we got from there was under a Creative Commons Share Alike license, which meant if we wanted to use their music, we had to license our podcast using the exact same license. We were leaning toward that anyway, so once we chose that music, that made it simple for us.
That's a good point. Early on in Retrobits, I wanted to use some material that was under that same license. And that is actually at the point that I hadn't really specified a license for the show up to that point. But then that pushed me into doing that because you kind of have to if you're going to use that material. It was specifically from the BBS documentary, from Jason Scott's
Okay.
Because
production.
everything I do, from the beginning, I wanted Monster Feed. The goal was eventually to make it its own little network. And that's why I've got more shows launching next month, that kind of stuff. But from the beginning, the idea was it's public domain. It's literally given away. You can put your own name on it if you want. You can sell it. You can literally do anything with it. So that precludes me from using a lot of Creative Commons things because they'll have often a share like I did. I'm like, no, dude, I'm literally. Now I only give away the original stuff. I'll also sample movies and commercials and say, okay, well that stuff's just sample, whatever. But anything that's original is literally given away in all my podcasts, other than the RCR stuff when we've gone with the Creative Commons on that. But for my own stuff, it's all completely do anything you want with it, remix it, use it, sample it, put it in on anything.
Since you're talking, what about your setup?
I use a completely different setup for all the podcasts.
Why?
Yeah, just because I like gadgets and toys, so you just it sort of fell into it. So we record, RCR we're talking about, like David and I both do the recording on that using Call Recorder, and I also use a back program called Paizo, which can record things like Skype and your own microphone at the same time, mix and that kind of stuff. I used to use other stuff, but it just doesn't work on the latest Mac things. So we'll both record that, but I'm really recording as the safety net. So if one time David's recording just tacked out, and mine was there as the safety, that's
This
really
happened
the
a
only,
couple
yeah, it
times.
happened.
Really
So that's
weird.
the only reason I record that show is to be the safety net, just in case. And then David takes it and he does the mix down, David does his magic, puts all the sound, and then gives back to me via Dropbox a final MP3 file. Then I take that and I do the final editing for things like iTunes. Like I'll put the show notes inside the MP3. I put the artwork in the MP3 and embed it and that kind of
So
stuff.
your Monster Feed site is hosting
No,
the file?
so yeah, no, this RCR, so,
Oh, that's right.
and what we do is, this is for RCR, and then what RCR does is then we upload it to Cyber Ears,
Oh, that's
who
right,
offers our
Cyber Ears.
hosting, and then I separately upload it to Amazon S3, where I have hosting for Monster Feed, and that's our backup, just in case Cyber Ears goes down or something. So that's our online backup, so that's how that's produced. For 1 megahertz, I record into Pro Tools, and I use a different microphone. I use a microphone for RCR that's a Heil PR40. It's a high-end, nice microphone. But you really can't, once you did these things down, you really can't tell. You're talking to anything, it sounds the same on a podcast. And I use a Rode podcaster mic for 1 megahertz, which is just a USB plug-in mic. I record that with a little pop screen in the front of it, because I have terrible mic technique, like terrible.
This is $25.
Yeah, you can, really don't spend a lot of gear. I just like stuff. And then I record into Pro Tools for that. But I do know, that one also, I do no script or anything. Like, it's just, I'll play the game, once I feel like, okay, I'm done, mostly, I'm done. That's what it's done in the podcast. I'll then go read about it and try to get a bit on the history so I understand what I'm talking about. And then it's just, ready, live, done, stop recording, you're done. Like, I literally, like a little fader thing, so I okay, put the bumper in, so I use ums and I just do it live. And then DoubleTake, I use, because I often have to open the thing and be in front of a movie monitor, that kind of stuff, so I use actually this microphone, which is it's also a Rode, it's a lavalier mic, so it just clips to me, and then I can just walk around with it. So I use that, and I still record into Pro Tools for that one, for the one Sherry and I do. But that one also is done live, and in that case, it's fully live. Like I play the intro music and we're both hearing it. It's recorded through Skype and Paizo, and at the end of that, then she says, welcome to DoubleTake episode. Next one's episode 50, and at the very end, then we say, okay, see you next week, and then I fade up the closing music, and I save it, and I'm done. There's no editing at all. And Pro Tools exports that one already with the embedded artwork and the notes and all that. So I literally am exporting the finished file directly into my local iTunes. It says, save this to iTunes, and then I upload it, and that's it. So that one's the least production.
David, tell me about your setup.
So I've always used something like this. This is actually the second one. I don't remember I have my first one, but it was pretty good. And
You did that hissing
broke.
thing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I didn't do it on Windows, but I do it on the Mac.
Yeah.
Or the Cyloning. That's what.
Yeah,
It's called.
a
You guys remember
lot of
that when I first
headsets.
started.
Weirdly, if you get into podcast, you gotta watch it. A lot of headset brands on Macs,
And I have to unplug
after
it,
a certain
plug it
amount
in.
of time, will start to generate hiss. You have to unplug it, plug it up. It's like a static buildup. It's weird. So only on headset mics and Macs for some reason.
Skype in 1 hour in Mac.
Is it?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
some weird thing where it would happen to David all the time. We're like, what's with the, David's attacking us.
And it was a Plantronics, and this is a Plantronics, this one doesn't do it. So then I bought this one to replace it, which works pretty well, but then for this past Christmas, my wife and kids, my main Christmas present was now I can't remember the brand of it. It's like $100 microphone. Pop filter.
Yeti, right?
Yeah, the Yeti,
Yeah.
yeah, which is
Just
very
by,
nice.
Blue. Blue makes good mics.
Yeah, USB, and then my headphones come off it, and I have a pop filter, and yeah, I didn't want to try to bring that here. So I've always used that, and then used the Yeti. Always used the Mac, Skype. With spent $20 on. I did a little bit of research before I got started the RCR for call recorder. When I did by myself, I just did straight into GarageBand. So now it's Skype and call recorder, and then I pull that into GarageBand, and I could tell some funny stories about my learning process. Like I said, I've never separated out.
Yeah, in Call
the
Recorder,
tracks
when
and-
it saves, it actually creates a movie file,
Yeah, you drag
weirdly. And in it, it has separate tracks for the incoming call and the local person. But David only found out yesterday that that is the case. He's always just saying, I'm like, what do you mean you don't separate that? I thought you level us. No,
Yeah,
like,
and I had some
I
fun
assume you
times.
did.
I had some fun times early on with like mine's way down or theirs is up or something, and so you have one track, and it would take me hours to go through and listening and then going through and adjusting everything and
Separate tracks.
yeah. But what else I need to tell you? But I got good at it, and then I haven't had that problem in a long time, and so pretty much I come in the garage, so here's last show, and then I open it again after we recorded, and I delete the audio, our voices, and I still have the music and intro, and then I grab the new one, stick in there, and and then adjust it and everything.
With feedback and stuff, both to my shows and what I've heard from other shows, most people really honestly do not care that much about the quality of the sound of the voice. All they really care about are relative levels. You have two people
Yeah,
and one
you don't
person's
need to
loud and
turn
one
it up
person's
and
quiet.
down.
It's a pain to listen
Yeah.
to it. Because if it's loud enough in the car, you can't hear the other.
Because you're having to fiddle with.
As long as everybody's roughly the same level, it kind of does. They're all dithered down to low quality MP3s anyway. So it really doesn't, you don't need high end gear, you don't need anything. You just make sure everyone's roughly the same volume and you're gold.
Let's talk about that real quick too, just, because in case people don't know it, if you're gonna have a podcast and you host it on iTunes. iTunes does not host the file. You host it somewhere, and iTunes simply is a place that you're publishing a link to it. So when somebody downloads your file, downloads it through iTunes, they're actually downloading it from your serving site, wherever it be, your website or being it's Libsyn or whatever. Somebody else's. So you could make the file a 16K BPS file if you want to, or you could make it a 256K BPS
You're
file.
paying for your bandwidth.
You're paying for your own bandwidth. You can make it as nice as lousy if you want.
Now,
Or like video versus audio, because I did a few
And
video ones.
that's
The one
right.
thing-
You can do video podcasts. which
Well,
you're starting-
August 1st, yeah. The 8-Bit Archaeology launches August 1st, and that's a video one. So I've been really concerned about what are my bandwidth costs going to be. But that one is specifically designed to appeal to a very tiny audience. Like I'm kind of intentionally hoping I get like 100 people watching it, because it's going to be just an unboxing thing. So I'm not really that concerned with the bandwidth on that. Versus if I was anticipating 20,000 downloads, then I would be concerned. But with video, you can host through iTunes or YouTube and stuff, so you have other people that you can dump it onto.
We're right at 11:45, and I am enjoying this, but I don't want to keep people if they want to get to lunch. But we could go longer if you want to. I was thinking it'd be interesting to hear about have we had any disasters in trying to do this, or I think somebody has some bloopers.
I have a few,
Ken has bloopers.
5 minutes worth.
Yeah.
Ken has bloopers.
I want to make
Excellent.
bloopers.
One quick thing I want to add about separating the different audio tracks. With the MS podcast, the particular audience I'm speaking with are not tech savvy. So when I conduct interviews over Skype, I don't have them record, but as you pointed out, you can record the incoming and local calls separately. It's only when you have more than 2 people on the show, which every episode of RCR and OpenApp will do, that you really need to get people to record locally. So I don't have to ask the people from my MS show to record theirs. Sometimes I'm recording not online at all. I'm actually going to their house and speaking with them, in which case I use a handheld MP3 recorder, which is sitting right there. And that produces just one audio track that I can't separate. The benefit to doing that is I'm interviewing them in person and establishing a rapport that you don't get online. There was one person that I interviewed after I went over to her house for dinner. You know, you can't do that online. So there are benefits to both.
If anybody's interested in podcasting, like, or doing anything like this, I have found not only us, but everybody in podcasting loves to talk about it. Wants to talk about gears, the stuff that they learned. It is so easy to get information. Like, it's so easy. You just approach anybody and say, great, here's what I did wrong. Don't do this, I like this. And like,
I
it
mean,
is
we wouldn't do
crazily
podcasting if we didn't
helpful.
want to talk.
I'd be happy to tell you what you did wrong.
Which
You can also roll down for more feedback about it, audio levels and
Well,
good
and I
and
know we're
bad.
short on time, but there is one change in our format we're going to make that I think might be worth talking about here, which is up to
David's
date-
out.
Yes.
We're announcing
we're
live,
kicking
David.
David out.
I'm in.
Secondly, yeah, and Ken's going to join us. Up to this point, we have done the podcast on our own. You know, David mixes it down, and then we publish it. And the audience really isn't participating in the production of the podcast.
We're sick of it.
Yeah, who wants the participation? So we're going to try to move to something like what This Week in Tech does, what Twit does, where we'll be doing the podcast, streaming it live, having a chat channel so that if people want to get in and chat while we're doing the podcast, they can type in questions. You know, it'll be very interactive.
Because doing that kind of stuff has become really easy thanks to Google Hangouts and stuff. So we figure, well,
Right.
and we record on weekends, so it's in a nice fixed time that's
It'll be a good
scheduled. So
time.
it should be easy if somebody wanted to participate. Hey, get involved, be part of it.
And I know for myself that probably will not be, I probably won't be involved because like I think Ken said, my podcast listening time is on the way to and from work.
Right.
Most, you know, almost everybody time shifts podcasts.
Sure.
So, but if people do want to jump in, if there's some, you know.
It can kind of enhance the show some too, even if you're only listening, but the fact that some people are participating and we're reacting to it.
So it's actually getting a little bit more like talk radio.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In a
podcast
sense,
is
not
essentially
commercials.
like talk radio. Yeah, talk radio without the money coming in.
Right.
That's right. Even though you told your wife only about 12 listeners, I'd be happy, and you've got all these, you know, many listeners. It still isn't generating any money for you, is it?
It brought us down here.
Well,
It
true.
did.
That's true.
We got sponsored to come down here.
I
So
suppose if you can get a sponsor, it does generate at least pizza money.
yeah,
I'd like to know what you guys get out of cyber years.
the hosting.
That's it.
Just the MP3 or the whole
Space.
site?
Difficult hosting. He said, I was like, I always upload it.
Do they upload, do they host just the
No,
MP3?
just in.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, I know. I hear you. I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I'm with you.
okay.
We have a very nice listener, you know, and fan, and so he offered, it's his company,
Okay.
so he offered to give us that space.
Yep,
And we were moving servers anyway and stuff, so it was like,
Okay,
all
because
in.
Mike and I put our MP3s right on open-apple.net, and in return, we don't have to advertise anybody.
Yeah, I host all my own stuff
And
on
that's what I
Amazon
do.
S3, which is so cheap. If you're looking for like crazy cheap hosting and bandwidth, it's bonkers how inexpensive Amazon is for big bandwidth use and things. It's crazy. I thought it would be much more expensive than this.
I want to say one more thing, and then I know, and Ken can play his thing,
Yes.
is that, so we're doing, you know, the show live today at 7:30.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
We have show notes?
yep.
Cool.
And
This
also,
will
I
actually
thought
be the
we could
first
project them
time
up and,
we've ever done an RCR with live participation, so it's gonna be cool.
or together in the same room, or.
That's true.
But also, I think we could put the show notes up on this, you know, the screen, and people can see, sort of see the process too.
You should go to your rooms and call in.
That's what I'm going
It'll
It'll be the first and maybe last time.
Yeah. Plug this in? I don't really need video for this.
Okay.
But this would be good. Thank you. Are the speakers even on? No. That might be useful.
Does anybody else do podcasts?
I got it.
Anybody else podcast? Not you.
Who's that in the back?
You walked off the last show, yeah. No? It's fine.
Walk off every show.
So one thing I want to briefly play is, like I said, I learned a lot doing Open Apple, but I then took them to the multiple sclerosis show.
Save.
Here's the intro from Open Apple.
Welcome to the Open Apple Podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a longtime user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Who is it?
Actually, an alumnus of this school.
Okay.
She was one of the student CAs checking people in, and I'm like, you have a great voice.
Yeah, she has a good voice.
And now here's the intro to the multiple sclerosis podcast.
Welcome to MS Challenge Talk, bringing the world 3 days and 50 miles closer to a cure for multiple sclerosis. Whether walker or crew, veteran or new, join us as we share news and memories from MS Challenge Walk.
So different voice, but almost the exact same script.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the outro.
The same sort of feel.
Now, this has been Open Apple / MS Challenge Talk. Find more episodes, send feedback, or read our blog by visiting us online at blah, blah, blah. So I just didn't know what else to have them say. And, you know, it worked the first time, why not the second time? Right. Let's see, what else do I want to record? So, the intro and outro, the student CA recorded for us first, because that's all we thought we needed. And then like the day before we were going to go live, we realized we need bumpers in the show to separate out the segments. And we'd already had her in the studio to record an intro and outro. We couldn't get her back in the studio in time to do the bumpers. So we took my laptop with a USB microphone, and in her apartment, she didn't want to interrupt her housemate who were asleep. So she got under the covers of her bed and recorded on a USB microphone on my laptop. And we used that for the first 3 episodes of Open Apple, episodes 1, 2, 3. And then we got her into the studio to re-record them. So I want you to hear the before and after of how the show changed a little bit.
What's it worth to you? Hold on to your wallet as we look at the latest Apple pickings. What's it worth to you? Hold on to your wallet as we look at the latest
way less
Apple
Before and
pickings.
after.
How well do you know your Apple soundtrack? See if you can name the game. How well do you know your Apple soundtrack? See if you can name the game. Get what's new and exciting in retro computing with 2 news. Get what's new and exciting in retro computing with 2 news. Old or new, it's still cool in retro views. Old or new, it's still cool in retro views.
And then we also had to re-record the outro, because the first 3 episodes, she says, find more episodes, send feedback, or read our newsletter by visiting us on the web. Because we originally intended there to be more of a textual component to Open Apple than there ended up being. So we scrapped that idea and said read our blog, which is a newsletter. Anyway, let's see. Now, let's see, I already played for you her intro.
Welcome to the Open Apple Podcast.
But I found this really neat effect you can do in Audacity, which I have to share. Let's see. And basically, it produces the effect of her having recorded the intro for us late on a Saturday night.
Welcome to the Open Apple Podcast, where we celebrate the Apple
How many
II.
shots was this?
Well, I'm not sure.
Whether you're a long time
Bartender.
a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community. Join us as we share news and memories.
You gotta really do something like play something like that, and the recorders say, you know, like, are you okay? Or let her never come back.
Famous personal computer.
The most mellow retro computing podcast ever.
That's how you pad out 10 minutes worth of material to an hour. Everybody do that.
So now I have a minute and 3/4 of bloopers, and then one more thing I'm going to play for you, and then we'll get out of here by noon. So these are, I have an hour of bloopers. I've turned it down to under 2 minutes. And I tried to focus on ones that either are about these guys or actually feature these guys.
Our whole show is blooper.
So and you'll definitely recognize the voice of the very last blooper.
Okay, so it seems that Mike doesn't have anything else to contribute.
I never have anything to contribute.
So I'll just keep talking. It's the Ken Show, starring me.
Isn't it always? It's always about you.
I try not for it to be. When Carrington's on the air, it's about him.
It's always about you.
True. Even when he's not on the show.
That's right. And Jason Scott. Yeah, I think Jason's packages definitely provide the extra value for the money.
You guys talk about Jason's package?
I never thought we'd be on the show talking about Jason's packages.
Time to move on.
Scott.
Okay, I have a suggestion. From now on, every time before I start to say something, I'm going to play Hail to the Chief. And then every time you say something, we're going to play the Price is Right loser music.
Liar! Should we do the Voltron cry that RCR does?
That's hilarious.
The what?
That was...
Yeah, I know. I don't know what they're doing over there.
They don't know what they're doing.
That's right.
One, we need to synchronize our audio tracks, and the way we do that is we basically just count 1 to 4. I say 1, Mike says 2, David says 3, Steve says 4, and then I use that as an audio cue to line up the tracks. So 1,
2.
David!
Sorry. It's kind of big and sort of phallic, but it's really nice. My new microphone.
Indeed.
And finally, sorry, David.
Hey, it's talking about my microphone.
That's right. That's what he calls it.
And that thing I talk into.
Right. And this last piece is something original that hasn't been played before, other than for me and Mike and Andy. And one of the things that Mike and I love about Open Apple is the number of people who have contributed to it over the year. We love having that rotating guest seat. We love having the guest bumpers. And we just love bringing the community in, whether or not you're at KansasFest or just a subscriber or whatever. We've talked to people all around the world who love the Apple II. And we've gotten to hear their stories and share it with all our listeners. So I'd like to play this very brief tribute to all the people who have made Open Apple what it is.
This is Vince Briel.
Hi, this is Steve Weyhrich.
Hi, this is Martin A.
This is Jason Scott of TextFiles.com. This is Sheppy.
Hi, this is David from the Retro Computing Roundtable.
My name's Alon.
This is Ara.
This is Carrington from 1 MHz.
Hi, I'm Bob Bishop.
Hi, this is Sean Fahey.
Hi, this is Ivan Jordan.
This is Ed Eastman.
This is Andy Malloy.
Hi, this is Andy Rowan.
This is Randy Brandt from Beagle Brothers.
Listen to Open Apple.
You guys indulge Charles, another 45 seconds or whatever?
Yeah, you need to.
Yeah, I got one thing. One thing I can play that you may or may not have heard before. We made it for the Retro Maccast. So you may not be able to see this, but I'll put it right here.
Oh, yes, I know.
Some people can watch it.
Hello.
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 Hello. I'm Carrington. I'm
They
Earl.
played with the Retro Maccast.
We're the Retro Computing Roundtable.
Congratulations, James and John, on 200 plus episodes. We'll be waiting for more.
Now, isn't that a throwback to Larry, Curly, and Moe?
Yep.
Yeah. I've always loved that. Hello.
Guess
hello,
which
thanks,
one's
I-
Curly?
I want to know who's Moe then.
So I
Who's
suggested
Larry?
it, and they liked the idea.
Have you guys been on the Retro Maccast as guests?
I have. Yeah.
I've been on Retro Maccast and Retrobits. But
I've
not
been nowhere. I sung.
That's true. You were
If you could see it, I mean, you see where the hellos, and then you gotta have to move around, and then where we all say hello.
That's GarageBand, people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so.
I mean, GarageBand really has a lot of cool tools that are specifically for podcasting.
Other than it auto-normalizes everything you record. So you'll find like when you record, you watch your waveform, and then as soon as you click stop, that section on its own will shrink or expand.
Yeah.
Separate from your universe. That drives me
If you use
crazy.
GarageBand, it can mess up other people's Audacity setups so that they have to make some new
Right,
rules
whereas
based
Pro
on the
Tools
guy who
doesn't.
screwed up on their podcast. Okay,
Yes.
that's it,
Let's
thank
go.
you.
Let's
Thank you.